Okay, good evening, everybody. Thanks very much for coming along to this evening's webinar, which we'll be talking about funding your studies in Northern Ireland as a Leaving Cert student or post-Leaving Cert student. I'm going to give it another minute because I know I'm going to be tortured with requests to join the webinar. So before I begin, I will give it a minute or so. But as always, um, if you have any questions throughout the presentation that you'd like me to answer or attempt to answer, put them in through the chat facility somewhere on your screen, and I will get to them likely at the end of the presentation. And if this is your third webinar that you've come along and witnessed, thanks for giving up your Monday evening. I know Ireland are playing France tonight, so I will endeavour to keep this no later than 50 minutes. I'll try, because I also want to watch that game. So, okay, that's 1 minute past 6. I think I'll make a start. And if I could ask Sarah, my guest, to keep an eye on those people joining the webinar, if you could just let them in. Okay, so this is going to be a really important webinar tonight because it is all about the financial aspect of attending college and university in the North and how Leaving Cert students manage it. We're going to talk about cost of living. We're going to talk about how it compares across the island where you study, how expensive, how affordable it is. I've also asked Sarah, who joined us on our first webinar, the student panel, to come back on and maybe just elaborate on some of the costs that she experiences as a first year student studying in Belfast. And we had a conversation just before everyone had come on. So I think she's a few interesting things and piece of advice for anybody who is, no matter where they're studying, just to consider as part of their college research. I want to talk about the tuition fee loan then. So this is the main piece of funding that students get to cover the cost of education in the North. So this is this piece of funding that will make essentially university free whilst you're here. I'll talk about what avenues there are for getting maintenance funding. If anybody had attended our applicant days, you'll know that the main one is SUSI, but what other routes are available, and then bursaries and scholarships. And then I'm going to come and take your questions at the very end. So again, if you have any questions throughout the presentation, put them in the chat facilities and I'll get them at the end. So, how much is it cost to study in Northern Ireland? For those of you who have heard me talk about this before, I tell you that no matter where you study, there's going to be a financial implication to it, and it's not always obvious as to what that is. So I want to be upfront, but before I tell you that, I want to simply impress upon you that whilst you're here, if you decide to come to either Ulster University, and I'll give Queen's University a shout out to, you don't actually have to pay your fees whilst you're with us. And that's because of this tuition fee loan. And I'm going to endeavour to explain the nuts and bolts in that and how that works. So university is free whilst you're here, at least the education aspect. You don't have to pay your tuition fees whilst you're here. And 99% of students don't pay their tuition fees whilst they study with us. But what other costs are there to studying in Northern Ireland? Well, really, as I've mentioned, university is free, so I therefore just tell people to ignore the fee whilst you're here. Obviously, that's because, again, student finance or the student loans company cover that, and that allows you to spend any money that you do have in savings, focusing on particularly accommodation. So really your only upfront cost at Ulster University or Queen's University is going to be the cost of accommodation and of course the general cost of being a student. How does this compare to maybe your CAO options in the Republic? Have we table here? Oh, sorry, forgot about this slide. I'll get this out of the way because much of this presentation tonight is going to be talking about this tuition fee loan, which I've mentioned. Uh, for anybody who has applied to any of the above courses, you don't actually have to pay any fees for these courses. So all these courses you see on the screen don't have any tuition fees. And that's because the Department for Health in the North, they pay for student places. So that allows our students to never worry about tuition fees. They don't need any piece of finance. So when I come to talking about the tuition fee loan for any applicant who's applied to those courses, you might want to run off and make yourself a hot beverage before I come back to the main parts or the final parts of the presentation. So how does that then compare to studying in the south? Well, I told you again, ignore the tuition fee in Northern Ireland. Really, you're looking at your upfront costs. In the south of Ireland, in the Republic of Ireland, there is a contribution fee, a student contribution that students must pay upfront. Currently, that's €2,000 a year. Usually, it's €3,000, but the government have introduced a budgetary measure to reduce that to €2,000. It remains to be seen whether or not that'll be still in place for September 2024 entry. But I'm only going on the figures that I have here. So some other universities will also charge a student levy charge. And in this example here, where I'm comparing cost north and south, I'm really looking at Ulster University and, our sort of nearest competitor, which would be UCD in Dublin. Not every university will charge you a levy fee, so this is really only looking at UCD. And you can see where the difference starts to add up in terms of cost. It is the cost of accommodation. It's high in demand at the moment. It is very expensive. So when you look simply at Dublin and then you look at Belfast or you look at Derry, you're saving yourself a small fortune every year. Simply in accommodation fees alone, you're saving roughly almost €7,000 a year in accommodation costs. And if anybody was on last week's webinar, you might have heard one of our dietetic students, Aoife Murphy, talk about the fact that her accommodation for 4 years on our Coleraine campus is the price for 1 year in Dublin. So the only upfront cost again at Ulster University is your cost of accommodation plus then your cost of living. Before I talk about cost of living, I want to show you what the accommodation costs look like, whether depending on the campus that you've applied to or studying that. So our Belfast campus would be typically the most expensive. And I know Sarah's going to talk a little bit about her accommodation costs and what she gets for it. But all of our accommodation, they include everything that you would want to find in on-campus accommodation. So there's 24/7 security and maintenance. So if, for example, a pipe bursts or something goes wrong in the flat or the accommodation, there's 24/7 maintenance men there to help you out and dig you out of that. And that's covered as part of your package. You're not forking out additional cost for hiring out a private plumber or whatever it is. Your Wi-Fi's and your utilities are included. Particularly at our Belfast campus, because it's brand new accommodation, it comes with a little bit more mod comms. Like for example, I know there's a cinema, I know there's a games room, and I'll let Sarah talk about what other facilities there are. Really, then our accommodation costs depend on how much luxury you want. So if you just want a single room in our Derry campus, then it is the cheapest. It's £110. Or if you wanted the very, biggest amount of luxury, which would be a double ensuite, then it's £140. So depending on how much your budget can stretch to, the accommodation might be slightly more expensive, but it's still very, very cheap when it comes to looking at different cities around Ireland. So for our Belfast campus, they offer a 44-week contract only, whereas our Derry and our Coleraine campus, they offer 37-week contracts. So the length of a contract is also should be taken into account when you're thinking about the price of university. And also, I've mentioned this in every presentation so far, but we guarantee on-campus accommodation, which isn't something that every university can or does do. For every first year student who makes Ulster University their firm choice on UCAS, and we spoke about this last week on the UCAS webinar, but I'll remind people this is your first preference choice on UCAS. It has no effect on your CAO application. And so provided that you make Ulster your firm choice and you apply for accommodation by the 7th of July, you're guaranteed on-campus accommodation. There is a booking fee as part of applying for accommodation. It's £100, and that's refundable if you decide not to take up your accommodation. How about cost of living then? How does it compare when we look at different areas in Ireland? Obviously, this is the average person's cost. So this is how much typically an average person would spend outside of their rent in these various cities around Ireland. And you can see obviously the two northern cities, they come out significantly more affordable than whether you're studying in Galway, Cork, or Dublin. I had asked Sarah to whether this was an accurate barometer of her spend in Belfast, and she's actually told me that she actually spends less than €500 in Belfast campus. So your monthly cost is obviously going to be things like feeding yourself and getting to and from university, entertaining yourself. Students, being a student is about having a good time as well. So taking yourself out for the evening, going to gigs, going to concerts, going for nights out, whatever it is. Your annual cost then will be the cost of your study for that academic year. So that would be 10 months of study whilst you're with us at the university in 1 year. So you simply multiply your monthly cost by 10. But again, this is really a rough sort of measurement tool. People will be different depending on how much people like to go out, or whether people go to the gym, or they like to go shopping a couple of times a week. Your monthly cost. But generally, this is the cost of items in those locations. So the cost of coffee, the cost of groceries, for example, and obviously the two northern cities, they come out on top, or the most affordable. Um, Moving on, and I want to bring in Sarah now, and maybe Sarah, the first thing to maybe ask you is whether that previous budget was accurate
For
for
Belfast,
Belfast in your
yeah,
opinion.
I think it's pretty fair. I think the first couple of months were more expensive because I was still trying to figure out, where to go and things like that. But every club, bar, restaurant has some sort of student deal, student night, cheaper day, cheaper something. So once you get a little bit savvy, as I said to you, I allocate myself about €100 a week. So in a month it's about 400. And only the first couple of maybe first month or two I went over it. So it depends on the person, obviously, but if you figure it out, then you can have a really, really good time for very little money.
You've very kindly provided your cost of living budget and items for the purpose of this webinar. So can you maybe just take me through it, and maybe explain what some of those items are? Obviously, we know what rent
Yeah,
is.
yeah. Well, shopping and stuff like that, I think my own personal tip for anyone, no matter where you're studying, is to do a meal plan or something during the week. So, because otherwise you're going to spend money on like spontaneous takeout, or you're going to buy food and then it's going to throw it out and it's just a waste. So the shopping is I normally go in very focused and know what to do. So that would also include
What
maybe
have you
getting a cup of
noticed?
coffee every day.
Have you noticed anything that's significantly cheaper in Belfast than maybe I don't know what Wexford is like, but is there anything that you kind of thought, gosh, that's quite reasonable?
This is a really stupid one. Chocolate and other sugary products and stuff like that. Anything that's kind of also anything that's made in the UK because of after 2016, obviously everyone knows that things have kind of gone up a bit. But anyone from down south who's come up with me really wants to go to like Tesco's or something and stock up on cheaper stuff. Aside from that, no, not really. Cost of living's kind of going up everywhere.
Hmm.
Uh, Social, as I said, I kind of don't really go out unless I know it's that particular night of the week where someone's doing a student night. Often, if I meet someone for a drink, we go over to the student bar or somewhere locally that does student deals, or get a coffee somewhere where we can get in with students. And miscellaneous, obviously, there's always a little bit extra money. Some weeks, as one of the days I go home. I don't go home very often. I don't think I've been since Christmas, and I'm going home now end of the week. So it really depends on the week. So I think that's pretty fair.
You're doing pretty well for £200 per week. Obviously, quick math would tell me that's £1,000 a month times 10. So you're looking at £10,000 a year. Is that right? Did I do that
Yeah,
math right?
so yeah, about that. Obviously, like yeah, still pay the rent through Christmas time and stuff like that. But I got nearly 2 months. I got about a month off for Christmas, so that was nothing, and got 2 weeks now for Easter, so that won't cost anything. So yeah, it kind of balances out to be about that.
And the money that you're spending or able to spend on likes of accommodation and entertaining yourself, um, you've taken out the tuition fee loan, right?
Yeah, which
So
was
that's
really great.
Do you want to explain just kind of how that works? I know I'm going to do it in detail, but what that means for you and, how it frees up costs.
Well, just I didn't know about it at first because not something a lot of us down south are kind of told about or something like that. So talks like this I think are really good to actually know about it. It was someone who was studying up here who was from my town, my hometown in Roscommon was telling me about it, and she was studying here in Ulster University. She was saying it's the greatest. It's do it, 100% do it. Just honestly, just found the paperwork online, filled it out, sent it in, and got nearly 5 grand cleared up that I could use for other things.
Fantastic. And so, yeah, as we'll see later in the presentation, that will free up significant amounts of money for you. And as already discussed, obviously studying in Belfast quite affordable relatively. So then tell me then just generally what your week looks like. I mean, are you I take it you're able to take yourself out and, enjoy the delights of being a student. Money isn't, equally as well, though, as we were chatting, you didn't get the Susie maintenance.
No.
So you had to
Uh,
find that money elsewhere.
yeah, see, my parents had put X amount of money aside for my college, but as you said, we were expecting me to go down south because that was just the only thing that was kind of in our heads. And because I said I'm from Wexford, so it's a big leap to go north. But so they had X amount put aside, and we were thinking about it, and my own savings, as in how to study with paying for the accommodation and paying for school and things like that. So clearing the tuition fee loan and having accommodation be cheaper up here than in Dublin or Cork or Galway has, been just freed up the money that we had previously put aside. So it's a lot easier now.
And what additional costs are there for your course? Before we move on, a final question. Well, what additional costs are there to your course? Is there anything that, aside from the tuition fee that you have to pay for?
No, I think like having a computer is good, having a laptop. It's not necessary 100% because you can use the university resources. There's desktops in there that you can access, and you can borrow a laptop from there for the day as long as you return it. So it's not 100% necessary. My laptop, I didn't buy it specifically for uni. It was one that my mum had bought a couple of years ago, and she wanted to change to something else, so she gave it to me. So, I'd say a laptop would be what you'd need for basically every course.
Okay, fantastic. Sarah, don't go too far because I'm gonna pick your brains throughout the presentation. But thanks for giving us that brief perspective on your university costs. So now I want to talk about the meat of the presentation. And this is for anybody who is applying or hoping to study a course that does have tuition fees. Again, for those people who've applied to courses that are funded by the Department for Health, this will not apply to you because when you enroll at the university, we will know that it's paid for by the Department of Health. But for anyone else who's applied for a course um, that has fees, this is the best route to get it paid for. You don't have to do this, I have to say. You can decide to self-fund. I always ask students when I hear about them self-funded, why have you done that? You've just given yourself a little bit of hassle. That's money you need to find every year. But with the fee loan, you know it's taken care of. So before I talk about the fee loan, I want to talk about this guy, Martin Lewis. He is renowned in the UK as the money saving expert, and he provides advice and guidance around navigating the financial pressures of life, like pensions and, I don't know, income tax, but also student loans as well. And he is fantastic when it comes to explaining the jargon of the student loan. And basically, a good quote that I found from him was when he was talking about busting the loan, and when you hear about taking out a loan, you automatically think debt. He basically tells you to ignore it, ignore the headlines about students leaving with 50 odd grand of debt. That's mostly a meaningless figure. What counts is how much you'll repay after you graduate. For some people who are high earners, it'll be more, but for others, it's free. And that is the point of this, is that the loan isn't actually a loan because that money will not ever cross into your bank account. How you repay it back is actually like a graduate tax. So you're taxed on how much you earn, not on how much you pay back. So this allows you to pay nothing while you study. Again, just to reiterate that point, in terms of fees. How it works, it's a non-means tested loan, so you will get it. It's regardless of how much your personal income or your parental household income is. It covers 100% the fees whilst you study with us. Okay, so that means that you don't need to put your hand in your pocket to pay fees. The fees are then paid directly to the university that you've applied to, in this case Ulster, by the student loans company, or they're also called the student finance services. And that allows you to pay nothing during your study until you graduate and until you're earning over the salary threshold, which is actually increased. I forgot to update this slide. So the salary threshold has now increased. Last year it was £20,195, but now it is £22,105. So you'll only begin repaying back this loan or these fees when you graduate and you're earning over that amount. So roughly it's about 22, it's probably about 23 grand with the current conversion rate. So you'll pay nothing back. Now, what you repay back is 9% of any income beyond this salary threshold. So when we look at salary repayments, this is what we can expect to find. So up until you're earning the threshold and including the threshold, you'll see on the left-hand side that 22,000 figure. That's roughly about a monthly income of £1,800. You're paying nothing back. And that doesn't matter if you never earn beyond that amount. You'll never repay anything on your loan. Okay. Now, when you begin to cross that salary threshold and you're earning a salary like £25,000, which would be a typical graduate salary in the North, or the UK in general, that's when you begin to repay it back. But as you can see, compared to your monthly income, it is a drop in the ocean. Um, and I don't want to be flippant about costs because I know it's high pressure for everybody at the minute, but it really is not a significant amount in accordance with what you're actually taking home. And really, you'd need to be a really high earner to start paying back inordinate amount of money that you couldn't afford. It's a stress-free loan as well. So this means that it doesn't affect your credit score. So this loan can't be used in the future to make any decisions about you borrowing money, or if you're trying to get a mortgage or you're trying to lease a car or whatever it is. It has no effect on your financial status. And that means creditors can't see it. And how I know this actually is I've just been approved for a mortgage. Congratulations, me. But when they ran a full credit report on me, the loan didn't appear anywhere because it's not considered debt. And that's because all of this notion that you're actually paying a graduate tax, it's very badly worded in that they call it a loan. It really is a graduate tax. So after 25 years that you've graduated, your loan is cancelled. Okay. It's 40 years in Scotland. So in Northern Ireland, you're given 25 years to repay it back. In 40 years, sorry, in England, it's Scotland and Wales, it's 40 years, after which, regardless of how little or how much you've earned, your loan is just wiped. And there's no penalties for not paying it back. And they don't chase you, they don't send debt collectors, it's just wiped. Okay, you've done your time of paying back into the student loans company. So that's why we say it is the most affordable and the best loan that you'll ever get in your adult life. Now, I'm often asked about how much interest applies on the loan. There is interest added onto the loan. Basically, the interest is worked out based on some really complicated piece of term called the retail price index, which I don't understand. But basically, the student loans company will adjust the interest added onto your loan based on this marker, which is done every September, I believe. But again, I know people will get hung up on terminology such as debt and interest and loans. So I want to inject a little bit of reality into this again by our good friend Martin Lewis, who kind of breaks this all down and debunks this debt theory. And he says that yes, in practice, student loans aren't interest free for many, but being charged interest isn't the same as needing to repay it. In practical terms, for lots of graduates, especially those who never become high earners, and in this instance, he is classifying a high earner as anybody above £80,000, they'll never end up repaying any interest, so it's meaningless. So that's why for myself in particular, and anybody that I know, and when we ask any students who come to us from the north or anywhere in the UK, they're not really thinking about the interest because they know in practical terms they'll never repay it back because they're given this time limited window to do so. And because the repayments are so small, they'll either not ever fully repay the loan anyway, or if they do repay the full loan, then they'll actually not pay any interest. And I know it's complicated, but if you are interested in finding out more myths about taking a student fee loan out, I've pasted the link here. Martin Lewis provides, I think, about 10 myths about taking out student finance. It is really worth a read, and there's loads of videos and resources about what that means. So again, this is the best way to fund your study if you don't want to fund it up front. So when it comes to applying for the student finance application, the applications are now open. They've opened actually a little bit earlier than I had been anticipating, but they're open now. And whilst there's no real deadline for applying, well, there is. It's 9 months after you begin your first academic term. They recommend that you submit this application by the 31st of May. It is worth going through it with any parents or guardians because it will ask for information that if you're an applicant, you just might not know. So it is worth sitting down, or if you have a question, if you're not really making sense of the application, then the contact details are there for Student Finance Services. I'll give you a sense as to where you can find this application. And where if you want to read any terms and conditions about the loan that just simply say that you're duty bound to repay it back, blah, 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 all the boring stuff, but equally important stuff as well. So when you're on the student finance website, you're going to want to go to undergraduate finance. And then if you're applying as a European Union student, and that includes if you're applying as a Republic of Ireland, then you'll see what you may be eligible for. In this case, it'll be a tuition fee loan, as we've already discussed. You can look at the terms and conditions, or you can now find the application form online here. So this is what the form looks like. It is a big form because there's lots of information, and it's the same form they use whether you're applying to universities in England, Scotland, or Wales. So there are various sections for students to make those applications. But the one section that you'll really be looking for is the studying in Northern Ireland section. Sarah, can you give me a sense as to how onerous an application this was? It's been years since I've done it, so I honestly can't remember.
Um, took very really quite easy to do because it looks like a really big document, but one of it's for English students, one of it's for Scottish students, one of it's for Welsh, one of it's for Northern Ireland, and one of it's for EU. So you're only filling in under a quarter of it really. So it took an afternoon to do it, double check it, and post it. Really easy.
And can you remember how long after you had submitted this application that you received notification back that you were eligible for the tuition fee finance?
I actually had a couple of issues with mine, which is really uncommon. Even when the uni contacted me about it, well, I contacted the uni to let them know that there'd been some delays. They're like, this never happens. It's not a big deal. So it's not supposed to be very long afterwards. I can tell you that from everyone else talking to me. But yeah, mine took a little bit longer just because there was some issues. But it's one in the thousands of people who go for it every year. It happens to a dozen. It's no big deal.
Okay, fantastic. And so that meant just whenever you arrived at the university, it was just a straightforward enrollment process.
Yeah, no, just went in, got my ID, all worked out perfectly fine.
Fantastic. Thanks very much. So again, yes, just to reiterate, they recommend applying by the 31st of May. They do advise that it takes between 6 and 8 weeks to receive what you'll receive something called a notification of entitlement letter, and that'll basically just tell you what you're eligible for. But as this is non-means tested, you will get the loan. I'm also asked about, well, what happens if I go to the university, I decide it's not for me, and say within the first term, I decide to transfer to another university, maybe to CAO college or whatever, or I just decide, what, higher education isn't for me. You are liable for a part of the money that you've taken out, okay, or the fee for that year. So in the case of Northern Ireland, it would be £4,500. So if you become liable at the start of term one, and you're liable for 25% of that tuition fee. At the start of year two, then it is 50% of the tuition fee, or sorry, term two. So that would be January onwards. And then at the start of term three, which would be April onwards, that is 100% of the tuition fee. And then, of course, when you go into year two, the same rules apply as well. So basically, when you finished or left your course, you'll need to start repaying the amount and the interest that has accrued. You'll be liable for any loan paid to you, regardless of whether you finish your course or gain a qualification. But again, the same rules apply because it's only until you're earning enough money to repay it back that you actually will be liable for it. So whilst you will be technically liable, you won't pay it until you're earning over the salary threshold, which, as we've discussed, is €22,000. So let's then talk about maintenance funding. So unfortunately, there's no maintenance funding in the Northern system for Republic of Ireland students. It's only for Northern Ireland students. So that means you won't be eligible for a maintenance loan or grant through the same system that you got the tuition fee grant. So therefore, our other option is to look at SUSI, which thankfully SUSI do provide funding for students pursuing education outside the state. Now, there are two rates. Um, there's two types of finance rates that you'll get through SUSI. There's an adjacent and a non-adjacent rate. Basically, I would suspect for a lot of students or applicants in this webinar, you'd be looking at the non-adjacent rate, which is when a student's college is more than 30 kilometres from their normal residence. Unless there's anybody on here from Donegal, maybe looking at our Derry campus, then you'd be looking at the non-adjacent rates. And the total amount is variable. There's a huge amount of dependents or variables that look at like your dependents as a parent and how much you can get. So I can't even give you a ballpark figure as to how much you might get. But on Susie, the website, there is an eligibility indicator that will suggest whether you're eligible for the maintenance funding and how much you may get. So I have to defer you to Susie for any more information on that. The other option when looking at maintenance funding is to look at student-friendly loans. Obviously, we don't want to be promoting getting into debt as a student, and this is an actual loan. This isn't like a tuition fee loan where, as we've mentioned, the interest is meaningless. Here, the interest isn't meaningless. You will have to pay this back. So I promote this with caution. I realize not everybody will have the means to take out student loans through the credit union or through banks or whatever, but they are worth considering. You do get some decent rates with certain providers, and here the credit union would be a popular provider of student loans in Ireland. So say you wanted to take out €15,000 to cover your accommodation and just being a student for the duration of your course, which would be 3 years. You could take that over 5 years, and your monthly repayment would be €300. Again, I promote that with caution. I put that out there with caution, but it is something worth considering. If you have absolutely no savings or you've no other recourse to actually get money whilst you're here. You can, of course, and Sarah will tell you as well, is to build up your savings pot before you arrive. And Sarah, did you work before you came to Ulster University throughout the summer to build that pot up?
I did some odd jobs in tutoring and things like that. I didn't have like a job per se because I did a lot of I was commuting a lot between different places with family and did a lot of traveling. But yeah, I did some jobs during my leaving cycle and got a bit of money from that.
Okay. Yeah, well, it is worth considering again. This doesn't just apply if you're thinking about going north, but it applies wherever you're going in Ireland or beyond to try and get a little bit of money set aside now, either through employment or doing chores about the house or whatever, to try and build up a little bit of money that you can just put your hand to. What we do suggest at the university is to avail of an overdraft facility through a student bank account. And that is a safety net more than anything. So that if you ever do find yourself in hardship, you have a facility there to use. Usually the interest rates on student overdrafts is 0% throughout the time that you're studying. So they are worth looking at as well. But again, this isn't to promote debt as a way of funding your education. It's just to show you that there are different options out there. So the final thing I want to talk about before I come to your questions is bursaries and scholarships. I would say at Ulster University, our bursaries and scholarships are going to be much more limited than maybe other universities simply because of the fact that you're getting your fees paid whilst you're with us. But I do want to point out a few things here that you might find of note or of use if you are thinking about coming to Ulster University. The first is an access bursary, and that would be for anybody whose household income would be less than £19,203. A quick conversion might be about €21,000 on that. And you get an access bursary. It this is again the value of it is variable depending on its means tested. Basically, some people can get up to I think it's about €1,500 each year. So that's €1,500 that you didn't have. You can also get accommodation vouchers as well if you're eligible for the access bursary, and this would be £1,000 of the cost of your accommodation each year as well. There's a care leavers bursary if anybody who has been in care throughout their life. Again, that's the value of £1,000. And then the biggest bursary that isn't awarded by the university, it's actually awarded by the Department for Health, is a nursing bursary. And this is where all of our students receive a non-means tested bursary of roughly about £5,500 for each year of their study. And that's because simply nurses have significant additional costs, such as getting vaccinated. They have to register. There's professional registration costs with the Nursing and Midwifery Council. There are uniform costs. There's a whole series of costs that nurses have to do. So that's a way for the Department for Health to support them. We do have a number of scholarships as well. Very few, however, are pre-entry. So very few you'll look on here and see that you can apply for them now. A lot of them would be whilst you're in education at the university. So if you do particularly well in a module, or you come from a certain socio-economic grouping, then you can apply to these. But you can see the list here. There are a significant number of scholarships, so they are worth taking a look at and seeing if any of them apply to you. And I've pasted the link there for that. So coming towards the end of the presentation now, I've actually done that quicker than expected, but I am hoping to take your questions. Is if anybody hasn't applied, again, you can still do so right up until the 30th of June. And if you made your application now, then you would probably receive, if you can meet the entry requirements, you'd probably receive an offer back by the end of the week. Again, our Department for Health funded courses are no longer open for September 2023. So if you're interested in those, you would be looking now at September 2024. And also for those who have applied, who are considering their options, this is just a reminder that you will have to make a decision about that offer at some point. We spoke about the deadline dates last week. So we would love you to make Ulster your firm choice. And as part of that, you'll receive your place is guaranteed in the course if you meet the entry conditions. And then, of course, you get guaranteed on-campus accommodation. I want to come to your questions now, but before I do so, just to mention that our final webinar in the series is happening next Monday, again, same time, and that is on accommodation, the cost of it, which I've briefly mentioned today, the booking process and everything in between, and just enjoying your time as an on-campus resident. So we hope to be joined by the Head of Residential Services for that webinar. And if you have any questions beyond tonight's webinar, you can get in touch with me. So in order for me now to see your questions, if there are any, I have to just stop sharing my screen and I'll take a look in here. I see a few people had trouble seeing the slides. Hopefully you did see the slides then at the end. Apologies if not. So basically, is that 25 years for tuition fees payback versus GB? Can someone just confirm if they could see the slides throughout the presentation? Be very disappointed if not. But anyway, I'll ask Janet, answer Janet's question. Is that 25 years for the tuition fee payback versus NI? Yeah, okay, some people could see the slides, that's great. Versus GB, irrespective of where you earn? Yes. So if you studied in Belfast, say, and then you went to London to work, because you studied in the north, then your repayment window is 25 years. It's on where you study, so not where you're earning. Hopefully that's clear. Nolene asks, how does the payback work if you return to the Republic? So if you look in the student finance terms and conditions, they'll say that by UK law, you're duty bound to pay them back. Um, and they can do that automatically if you are paying into the UK tax system. So if you're employed in Belfast or across the water, then there's no hiding from the tax man. They find you, they take it out of your salary. However, if you return to the Republic, you are asked to tell the student loans company once you've graduated and once you're in employment in that jurisdiction. And then they look at what your earnings are, and they will adjust the repayment depending on to make it fair to you in terms of cost of living of that region. So you would set up a payment plan with them. If you don't tell them where you are studying, in their terms and conditions, they say that they can get a court order to make you pay to find you. I personally have never heard of it ever happening, but that's what they say in their terms and conditions. So you're asked just to set up a payment plan with them. Once you graduate, let them know where you're earning, send evidence of your salary, etc., so they can set up a direct debit with you. Some students decide not to pay it back, but I've never heard of anybody been taken to court for it. Yep, most people could see slides. That's great. Yes, if you've watched on the phone, maybe there might have been an issue. But the presentation was recorded, so you will get the opportunity to watch it back. Does the same apply to postgraduate courses? Yes, you can get a postgraduate loan to cover the cost of a master's degree. I recently was a benefactor of that. So again, that was just money that I didn't have to pay up front. It's added on to my undergraduate student loan. But again, it's included within the 25-year window. So unless I become a millionaire, I'll probably not pay it back. Um, yes, people asking if the webinar can be sent out. Yes, it will be sent out. What is the interest rates on the loan? Is it calculated every year over the term? It's calculated every year, and it is based off something called the retail price index, which I, as a non-economist, do not understand. But if you watch back the webinar, you'll see, and please Google Martin Lewis. He explains this much more eloquently and much more sophisticated. I can't even say the word sophisticatedly than I can, and he is certainly worth a listen because he takes the stress out of worrying about the interest rates and the debt factor. Um, so the retail price index is calculated over each year. I assume you can pay back the loan earlier than 25 years. Yes, you can make overpayments. I would ask why you would do that. I would just let your window tick down. That's money that's better off in your back pocket, not in the student loans companies, in my personal opinion. I'm certainly not making any overpayments, nor do I intend to. I'm just going to let my window run down. And Sarah, I don't know, have you any plans to make any overpayments?
No,
Or
I'm
maybe
just
you've
gonna
not
wait
thought about it?
25 years. I'm just gonna wait 25 years, let it go away, and not think about it.
Yeah, I'll be doing the same. Michelle asked, is a student finance application sent by post? Sarah, you were most recently, it's not an online application, it is a postal application, right?
I found it online, printed out the form, and posted it in.
Yes, although
So
I did see actually when I was looking at the application, you can fill it out and actually just send it by email, so you can do either to answer your question. Fifi asks, so you can just not pay back the loan by waiting 25 years? Well, Well, if you work in the UK jurisdiction, you'll have no choice if you earn over €22,000 because HMRC will take it out for you. If you return to Dublin or Galway and you begin working, it's up to you to tell the student loans company to set up a payment plan depending on what you're earning. Um, but again, that's up to you. I would suggest, however, that it isn't really an onerous amount of money that you are paying back. I displayed some of the example salary repayments, and if you're earning 30 grand a year, which is about £2,800 per month, you're paying back about 70 quid, I think it was. So, I mean, is it really worth dodging it for 70 quid a month? I don't know. It's really up to you. Um, but I wouldn't like to find out if they would really do or send a court order for you. But yeah, that's all I can say on that. I can't promote that at all. But just to let you know that you take a look at their terms and conditions um, for that, because they give you a few scenarios that if you're working over abroad and what that means for you. But yes, 25 years after which your loan is cancelled, regardless of how much or how little you've repaid. So if you were earning £10,000 a year for 25 years, you would pay nothing back because you're not above the salary threshold to pay anything back, and therefore your student loan would just be cancelled. Equally, if you were earning, I don't know, 50 grand for say 10 years and you'd paid maybe 70% of your loan back, after 25 years, your loan's cancelled. So you mightn't repay the full amount depending on what you're earning. I know it's a complicated topic. I know it is. But the main point is that your university cost whilst you're here is significantly less because you don't have to pay those fees up front. The €2,000 contribution fee might go up next year. I haven't heard any confirmation that it is staying the same. If even if it does stay the same year, €2,000 upfront a year, it's not a massive amount of money, but it's still money that I'd rather have in, my account or paying for accommodation. Because as we've evidenced, accommodation, it is really the big cost. So if you can save on the tuition fees while you're at university, then the accommodation is probably your priority, getting that paid. Okay, so I'll give maybe another final minute for questions, but I think we did quite well to keep that under 50 minutes tonight. And again, this presentation will be sent out likely tomorrow as a recording, and our final webinar is next Monday, where we're talking about accommodation. Sorry, I missed that. What upfront fee? So the upfront fee that I was talking about in CAO, so if you decide to study in a university or college in the south, you must pay a student contribution fee. It's currently €2,000. It's usually €3,000. But the government in the Republic have introduced a budgetary reduction for this year primarily. Yes, so you get that now. You do have to pay that up front, whereas in the north, you don't have to pay your fees up front, except for accommodation. Okay, so thanks again for spending a Monday evening with me. I realized it was probably a bad idea to choose a Monday, but there you go. I appreciate you coming along. If you have any questions at all, feel free to get in touch. And yes, we'll see you next week for the final webinar. Okay, some people liking Mondays. Okay, take care, everybody. And we'll see you next Monday. Cheers. Thanks. Bye bye.